Hello, welcome. In this video, we're going to be talking about Terry Date, the Michigan-born producer who has surprisingly had a huge influence on the music I've listened to, producing quite a lot of life-changing music for me. Um, yeah, yeah. So Terry Date, he was born January 1956 in Lansing, Michigan. Michigan, so kind of I think it's Seattle area. So, very where the early grunge scene came out, that kind of area. So already, in a place where a lot of awesome music was happening at the time. He initially started off um, at the University of Idaho, studying geology, which is quite a weird, thing. But then he had some kind of request, to do a bit of work, or offers to do a little bit of work, like the local bar scenes and stuff, do the sound for them and stuff. And then as he did that, he kind of realized that that was kind of what he wanted to do. That was what he enjoyed, and geology was not the thing for him, which is kind of fair enough, to be honest. Don't imagine him like just looking at rocks and us having this awesome music, or the music wouldn't just not being the same. Like, can't imagine it. So he drops out to study recording at Eastern Washington University, and does all that. Um, and then in 1984 is the first band that he really starts working for, and it's the first band he's invited to produce for and record that album. It's Metal Church's Merciless Onslaught. It's their 1984 um, debut album. Um, it's his first producer credit, but then it was also their debut album, and it was quite successful, at least locally. It got him kind of famous, like that local sense that a lot of the bands in that area knew who he was now, because of the success of that album, which led to him being getting in contact with Soundgarden, amongst other bands who were locals of that Seattle-ish area. That was mostly around 1989, so around 5 years later. Sorry, yes, sorry, no, it was around then. So he kind of been progressing, but he hadn't done much work beyond that. He'd done some other stuff. He actually worked with quite a few people between 1984 and 1989. 1989, he actually did quite a few incredible albums. So he was working with Dream Theater, so like John Petrucci. I can't pronounce his name. I'm very sorry. And then that Soundgarden, he produced Louder Than Love for Soundgarden. And then he got in contact with Pantera, or Pantera got in contact with him and actually chose him over a more local producer. They Texans, like Seattle and Texas, are not very close, but he still chose him as their producer for quite a few of their albums. But the initial one being, I believe, if I'm reading this right, Cowboys from Hell, which is one of the most awesome, groove metal albums to ever exist. That made him into, like, kind of solidified him as one of the producers of the 90s, of that kind of heavy alternative, that kind of scene. And I think partially the reason he got so successful was because he was so easy to work with. Looking at the interviews and just the kind of general vibe that people have given when talking about him or interviewing him or just seeing him being interviewed, he seems very easygoing. And he said he does like to give the band a lot of autonomy with their writing and stuff. He wants to be like a helping hand. He doesn't want to, be the puppeteer and controlling everything. He doesn't want to have that level of control. He wants to be much more natural and just let the band create what they want, but then also, giving them that assistance and that little leg up to create the best thing that they can create. Yeah, more like a helping hand than a controller. So yeah, furthering on with Pantera, even, which is really, the reason he got so big. He kind of his kind of process with them, as watching the interview with him talking about Pantera on Loudwire, it was very much he was just kind of keeping them on track and keeping them moving forwards, keeping them, producing, making stuff, and working and just doing new things. Because he was aware that they knew what they wanted to do. Like, they were all very talented musicians, especially Dimebag and and the others. So he knew that they knew what they wanted to do. So he didn't need to have so much control over the composition and writing stuff. He was always involved in the writing and always involved in that stuff, but he was very much more of like trying to achieve their goals than trying to say, well, do this because this is what I think. He was trying to do what they wanted to the best of his ability. So with their initial demo, that demo for Cowboys from Hell in '89, they kind of like piece by piece. So they kind of worked like very, average rock recording. You do your intro and then you do your next bit, working with tape as well. So you'd be, doing quite a lot and then recording little bits, and then that would produce, get that demo. Writing as we went, as he puts it. Then you give it like a rough edit, rough mix, and then drive around. I think that's a reference to like advertising and like sharing your music. I don't know. I don't really know Texan slang, but I would assume that's what it is. Working with Pantera, he says he had a lot of long hours, like there was 12 to 15-hour days, very commonly. He says, I remember a lot of sunrises on that record. And then focusing on like more of the artists of Pantera, like in reference to Dimebag, Terry Date felt that his job for Dimebag was to try and interpret the sound that Dime had in his head, because he was so aware that Dimebag was an incredibly talented musician and had that kind of musical ear. Like he was saying, like even volume, like minor volume levels, Dimebag was aware of the changes. He was so sonically aware of any changes on what he wanted, the exact sound he wanted, which is quite rare, to be honest. So yeah, he was very much like an interpreter for Dimebag, trying to create that kind of tone and kind of soundscape that was that man's head. He actually said Dime felt tortured because they could never really get that to the level that Dime wanted. He could never really get just like to that specific tone. But I think, that happens with everyone. No one's ever satisfied with music they do, because if you're satisfied with it, like, there's something wrong with it. But he did, like, this is the thing though, he seemed genuinely friendly and genuinely wholesome and like a person you'd want to be around outside of a professional sense, which is why he says he's still close with, Rex Brown, the bassist of Pantera, and then he says he considers Deftones like his family. I think that's partially the reason he was so successful, apart from the fact that he is an incredible producer. The fact that he's very easy to work with and very supportive of producing what the band want, very open to doing that, is what kind of defined him, I think. On top of that, I also think the fact that he worked with so many different subgenres of metal and rock, and he did incredible music throughout a lot of them, is what really surprises me. So, well, yes, metal and stuff kind of has that kind of similar sound. You do have the kind of prerequisites for metal. You want to kind of have a super heavy guitar tone. You want to like those kind of drums. It's all those little nuances. But I think he was very aware of that, and I don't think that's what mentioned enough. I think he was incredibly able to find what the sound was that was wanted and try and bring that to life, without, instead of being like, oh, well, I'm a thrash producer, so I can only produce thrash. I think he was very open to the idea of just doing whatever people thought was a good idea, because it was very much not him having to compose and do all the amp settings. Like, yes, he would have influence on all that stuff, but to a degree he would very much give the artists that kind of control. And once you do that, and then you can start, it's essentially like icing a cake. You can make a cake, and if the cake's burnt on the inside, no one's gonna like it. But if the cake is like the best cake that's ever been made, and then you add your icing on it, and your icing is also some of the best icing that's ever, existed, then you've got something special on your hands. I think what's really surprising to me is the amount of bands he's worked with that I love. I'm just going to list some off here because it really blows my mind how varied some of this stuff is. So start off with Dream Theater, as aforementioned. So that's, proggy metal. Mother Love Bone was mentioned quite a few times. I've not listened to them, but they seem important, so I might go check them out after this. Obviously Pantera, so he did Vulgar Display of Power, Far Beyond Driven. Southern Trendkill, and Reinventing the Steel. Wild. Like, those are some of the biggest albums of the 90s. Um, then obviously, Soundgarden, Bad Motorfinger, and also a future one that's meant to be coming out this year, which is very, very interesting. Um, I also feel he was working with them. Yeah, sorry, he was working with them for Louder Than Love, which is another one of their releases. So yeah, and then he works with Deftones. He's produced Adrenaline, Around the Fur, White Pony, the self-titled Deftones, and Ohms. Like these are genuinely some of the most influential musics of that alternative 90s scene in America. Helmet, he mixed Aftertaste for Helmet, another incredible album. One of my personal favorite bands of that era. I'd say like literally right up there. Incubus. He did the Science album. He did Limp Bizkit, which was just such a curveball for me to hear. It was like, oh my god, he's done like how, why? But then again, who else would do it? Like this is the kind of guy you'd want for it. It's the kind of ability to kind of work with every single genre, subgenre of metal, or like that kind of stuff, by having that kind of open mindset and also just talent and knowledge and skill. So yeah, he did significant other, Chocolate Starfish, New Old Songs, like those first two, like they're massive songs again. And then Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 official soundtrack. I'm not sure what exactly he did there, because I have a feeling it's like a soundtrack of other songs, but maybe he did some kind of production or making it work with the game. Don't know. There's not much information on that, unfortunately. Then he worked with Korn doing "See You on the Other Side," so another very big band these days. So yeah, he worked with Smashing Pumpkins on Zeitgeist. He produced that for them. He produced for Fall of Troy, doing Unlikely Event. He worked with Bring Me the Horizon, so this British band, doing Sempiternal, which contains the song "Can You Feel My Heart?" You know, that massive song. That one's, it's everywhere. It's also a massive TikTok sound now, but also that was like a huge song, an incredibly produced song, and it turns out he produced it. Slayer, Repentless, like he has just done so much of the metal and stuff and all that stuff of the last 30 years, no, 40 years. Oh god. He has kind of shaped the sound of the last 40 years for the alternative metal scene, I think. Because, I mean, I didn't know it. I didn't really look at who produced all the stuff when I was growing up, when I was like 15, 16, like as a teenager, listening to a lot of music, especially through COVID, picking up a lot of music and all that teenage angst and all that stuff. Like, it's so influential, and it was so influential and it was so powerful to me, and it still is. But for it to have largely been produced by a single producer makes sense, to be honest. It makes sense that I do like a single producer's production quite a lot, because, he'll have his own sound, and he does have his own sound, he has his own techniques for this stuff, which is why I think I like it so much. It just works for me every single time. Yeah. In terms of what else I can find, there is a real lack of information about this guy. Looking up his Wikipedia stuff, it literally just tells you what he's done for his production, engineering, or mixing, tells you when he's born, tells you where he's from, and tells you the genres he works with. Like, it doesn't really give you very much, and there's not really much online. There's some like technique stuff which I have had a look at. I've had like a look into and like experimented with, but that was like 3 or 4 videos. There's a real lack of information about this man for someone who has really shaped the sonic landscape of the alternative scene, alternative metal, like just the metal scene, like just that kind of that scenes for the past 40 years, and he hasn't really got that recognition. I think partially because that scene, generally speaking, is kind of anti-fame in a way, not so much the bands, but the kind of general vibe of alternative stuff is that you're kind of going against the grain. You're not looking for the fame, you're kind of looking for the doing what you want, like doing you, which I think is also very powerful, and quite inspiring. Honestly, I would kill to work with this guy. Like, if I had the opportunity to, I would pack my bags and move to America, just on the off chance that like I could work with him, I think. That being said, I don't think I'd want to go to America right now. Maybe in 5 years' time, assuming there's no third term. But yeah, I think overall, this is like an incredible stroke of luck that I've been given this producer um, as part of the project, as my project. I really am very fortunate to have this and to have been given this kind of new knowledge of a lot of the music I like comes from this one guy. Why is that? You know, like, and being able to understand that and being able to also try and create sounds similar to that and try and shape my own production style in a similar way to him, with even though there is very limited information about his production. If that makes sense. Um, yeah, I think very happy to have been given this and very, very fortunate. Um, I'm struggling to think of another producer that has had a bigger influence on my life. Yeah, no, I really don't think there has been one single producer that has had a bigger impact on my life than Terry Date. Yeah,